Did you know that post-secondary youth with disabilities have a harder time getting a job than their peers? Let's help break down the barriers by taking the Youth Leadership Initiative survey at disabilityfoundation.org/YLI.
Hello, and welcome to Discover Stories on Reimagine Radio. My name is Sean Burdett, intern with the Vancouver Adapted Music Society, and today we have a very special guest and dear friend of mine, Kelly Estomo. Kelly is a freelance musician and peer educator for the queer Asian community in affiliation with the Asian Community Aid Services in Toronto, Ontario. Kelly, thank you so much for coming on today. How's it going?
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, Sean. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing peachy, just perfect.
Peachy, nice. We like peaches.
We really do. So why don't we start off by why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Okay. I'm Kelly Estomo. I'm a singer-songwriter and I work in nonprofit, as you said, as a peer educator. I'm Filipino Canadian. I'm a Pisces. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so glad to hear that. So I was hoping that we could start off by telling if you could tell us a little bit about your disability and what your experience with that has been like.
Sure. So I have BPD. I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder in 2019, and that is a personality disorder, which I also read could also be called emotionally unstable personality disorder, which is more of a mouthful, but it kind of explains it better.
Interesting. And on that note, could you tell us like a little bit about what borderline is, or borderline personality disorder?
Yeah, sure. So it is a personality disorder, and you need to show, I think, five or six of nine traits for a certain amount of time to be diagnosed by a professional, of course, not yourself. And some of those include fear of abandonment, unstable relationships, unstable sense of self, impulsivity, a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, I had no idea really what it really was when I was diagnosed with it. So it was quite the journey.
I see. And
Mhm.
you mentioned how there's with the criteria, there's certain traits, and you only need to be diagnosed with some of them. So would you say that there's a lot of difference between how the disorder looks among different people? Like, would
Oh,
you?
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I feel like depending on the person who has it, their personality makes the BPD manifest in a different way. So it's not going to look the same for everyone, which I didn't really know when I was diagnosed with it. I had one vision of BPD, and that was kind of like a manipulative person, an impossible person to deal with. And that was a very stigmatized version of BPD that I knew back then. And it made me have a hard time applying it to myself in the moment.
Hmm. And has that viewpoint like changed over time, or
Yeah,
yeah?
definitely. I couldn't help but look it up and do more research if it was something that I would have to incorporate into my life and accept as a part of me. So upon research, upon talking to other people in my life with BPD, I realized how different everyone is. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, I think you touched on this a little bit, but how has your experience with this really affected you?
BPD was never really a forethought when I thought about myself. I had always thought and felt that something was wrong. And I always thought I was one step ahead of myself. I always thought it's probably depression since I like Googled it a bunch of times and applied those to myself. And I was diagnosed with depression in 2017 by my family doctor off like a 10-minute DSM type quiz. Um, but after I was diagnosed with BPD in 2019 by psychiatrists, it gave me a lot of clarity to like behaviors I've had since I was a kid. So I'm very happy to at least have some context and understanding. And I definitely rather know than not know.
Okay, and I know you mentioned it briefly that you were initially diagnosed with depression, and then it was BPD. So was that Was that in conjunction with, or was the first diagnosis ruled out as part of that?
That's a good question. I remember my psychiatrist saying the depression was kind of a product of BPD. So if something were to happen to me, like a social situation that was a stress factor, my response would be depression because of the BPD. At least that's how it was explained to me.
Okay. And in that situation specifically, how has that affected you? Like having this one diagnosis and then realizing later on, oh wait, hold on, maybe there's something else, or there's something else that a different disorder that is a better fit. How did that affect you personally, your treatment, your affect?
Well, it was definitely confusing. When I was diagnosed with depression, I was kind of in like a I knew it state, and I was put onto meds, and they did work for a while, the antidepressants. Um, and then 2 years later, there was something stressful and bad that happened to me, and that led to a BPD diagnosis, which, as I said, I had never thought in my head at all was for me. So it was definitely a shock. It was shocking and it was confusing. And I was a little curious. I was like, why? Why BPD? Why is this the thing I have? The thing I never thought I would have? The thing I only thought, imaginary people have, imaginary villains. So it was definitely more it was more of a clarity moment for me, and it opened me up to a community of people that I never thought I would interact with or relate to before, and I'm really thankful that that's happened.
And would you say that your exposure to that community has really helped decrease the initial shock or the stigma that you had when you were first diagnosed? Or
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, for sure, for sure. Because putting a face, real people's faces, and real people's stories to BPD kind of humanizes it and makes it more of like a nuanced kind of thing rather than the one image, the one character I saw when I thought of BPD.
right on. Is there anything else that helped your viewpoint transform regarding like the disorder, or?
I think talking to other people, whether they had BPD or not, it was validating to hear that there's not one way to be someone with BPD. And it was validating to hear that people with BPD aren't bad people, which is obviously a simple thing, an obvious thing you would think, but it is more stigmatized than I thought until I realized I was apprehensive to claim BPD, and I was apprehensive to even tell people I had BPD, way more so than depression. So that was definitely the kind of the flashing lights that said, you need to start unlearning some things about BPD.
Good for you. I'm really glad to hear that um, you were able to really overcome those initial thoughts and feelings regarding the disorder, because it really is a heavily stigmatized. Obviously, I can't speak to it personally, but just knowing the field, it really does get a bad rap.
Mm-hmm. Super stigmatized, and also I feel like not a big topic. When people think of mental illness, they think of depression and anxiety, and that's it. And that's why I was so open about depression when I was diagnosed with it. But with BPD, I was like, well, who really knows or cares about BPD?
Maybe building onto that point, is there anything that you've learned maybe about yourself or maybe society as a whole from your experience with BPD?
Yeah, well, I've now accepted it as a part of me, and I have all the tools I need to adapt with this personality disorder. But now, like I said, I've been more apprehensive about sharing it more so than depression because of the way people view BPD, and also because people don't really know about it. Um, Depression is such like a huge topic, and it's easier for people to relate to, but the way people have whittled down BPD to like a single character or an image, it makes me feel like they will see me that way if I come out with, you know, the truth of having BPD. So I feel like it's more of a hush hush thing, and people don't really talk about that when, you know, Bell Let's Talk comes around, and tons of people will talk about their depression and stuff. But never have I really seen anything about any personality disorders, to be quite honest. So yeah, I have definitely learned that about society, the people around me, and myself. I'm definitely victim to that as well. And I'm still trying to unlearn that, you know, part of me that's like, you know, these are a certain kind of person.
You mentioned a few times now about how uh, when society thinks about mental illness, they really only think about anxiety and depression. They don't really think about BPD or other personality disorders. What do you attribute as the cause to that?
Ooh, that's a good question. Hmm. Media.
Media.
Definitely media. Um, and I'm sure like depression and anxiety were also not portrayed the best and kind of exaggerated in media, TV, movies, books, just as much as BPD, but there's definitely more characters that have depression and anxiety, more than I've seen with BPD. Um, Not to mention, I've seen this wave of like people start to accept their depression and anxiety disorders and come out with their mood disorders and talk about it more, which is great and awesome. And it's helped me accept those parts of myself as well. Um, but I think personality disorders have yet to have that wave, if ever.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So, what's one thing you wish that the greater public knew about BPD or maybe mental health as a whole?
It's very nuanced, and every person with BPD will present their own BPD differently because they are different people. I wanted to give a tidbit about BPD that people might not know about. It's a term called splitting, if you've heard of it before. It's a common thought process in the BPD community where we perceive people or things in extremes, and this is black and white thinking. This is all or nothing thinking. It's basically the idealization or the devaluation of people or things. Like this music genre is the best. It's great. And then maybe something will happen, like a musician in the scene is kind of like defamed, and you're like, this says a lot about this music genre. It actually sucks. So just wanted to share that little tidbit from the BPD community that splitting can be a common thing among people who have BPD.
It's really interesting to learn.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing.
yeah, for sure.
And I really liked your use of music as an analogy for that because, of course, you are a musician. How did you get started with music?
Ooh. Okay, that's a tough question because anyone who makes music hopefully likes music too. So to say that like I've always listened to music, I've always liked music, that's kind of a given. So I'll say I've made music since I could sing and write, which was like a really young age. I used to like write fake track listings for fake albums and plan those out as a kid and draw the album cover. I used to write songs with what little words I knew at the time. So I think my affinity for music and for writing and for singing, they all came into one to be songwriting. And I don't know if I'd be this into the musicianship stuff if I didn't have that aspect.
Right on. Um, so tell us about your music. What's your genre? What do you try to capture? Your inspirations.
Whew. All right, this will be a little long. Lately, I've been on a indie emo folk type beat, but I've always liked guitar music. As a kid, I was exposed to soft rock stuff like Sarah McLachlan and then dad rock like U2. My parents introduced Shania Twain to me as a kid, and I idolized that woman. And then in elementary school, it was more like pop rock. And then in high school, it was 90s grunge and pop punk and emo. And now I listen to a lot of like female indie artists. So while I look for myself in those musicians lately, I don't want to forget the music I listened to growing up because honestly, I feel like indie and singer songwriter stuff can grow to be kind of stale if you don't take in the influences of other genres around you.